Sponsors, money, revenue, accounts, training grounds, stadiums, David Hopkinson-ness. Just loads of exciting stuff has come out today that has completely, I think, changed the entire perspective around the next sort of 5 years at the club. So, mint. And also a part of it as well has led me back to my Whoop video that I did a while ago. I know the Whoop thing doesn't seem to be happening, so bear with me on that one, because I still think something's coming with that. But there's a part of my research that I did on that I think is a little bit relevant to what we've just kind of found out today. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about why I think everything that we found out today means that we're going to absolutely blast past clubs like Villa and potentially beyond for things like the Project 2030. Now, I'll be completely honest, today I'd planned to do a video which was sort of like an extension of my last video where I talked about the Eisler system and how sort of certain players fit in within the system. There's something I said in my last video where I was like, actually, I've kind of had a bit of a tactical conundrum and a bit of a thought about a specific player and a complete positional change for that specific player. So I will do that video. Because of everything that's come out today, I will do that video within the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks, probably around the international break now. So obviously, if you haven't seen the Eisler setup and all that breakdown, go back and watch that video, because a lot of people really like that video. I think it was a very good video. And then obviously, if you're then interested in watching the video of the player that I think is going to have a major positional change, if you're interested in watching that, then make sure you hit subscribe so that you don't miss that. But back to all the money, revenue-y, sponsor-y, stadium-y, training ground-y, David Hopkinson-y talk. So there's been a lot of talk in recent weeks about PSR, SCR, whatever you want to call it. A lot of it has stemmed from how many players that we've had to sell, and then also how many players Aston Villa have had to sell, despite Aston Villa having recent success pretty much every year, managing to stay in Europe every single year. And I've seen a lot of Aston Villa fans saying things like Newcastle fans are embarrassing trying to put themselves in the same category as us, because they're sort of right to a certain extent. They've had consistent success. They shouldn't have to sell their players, whereas we haven't had consistent success. We finished 12th last season, so we almost should have to sell our players. Like, realistically, if big clubs come along after you've massively underperformed, you have to expect to lose some players at that point. So I think right now, Villa's situation is a more damning reflection, a much more damning reflection of how anti-competitive PSR is than ours. But this is where also that view of things is slightly short-sighted, and why ultimately I think long-term we will actually completely surpass Villa. Because I think PSR, SCR, whatever you want to call it, I think that is probably actually eventually going to stop Villa, whereas I don't think it's going to stop us, providing the Premier League don't have a fucking emergency meeting again, which is more than likely, to be honest. But providing that doesn't happen, I'll go into it. So to go back again to the frustration of Villa fans, they've been consistently succeeding, but they're having to sell all their players. But the thing is, and this is the reason why it's very different to us, the reason that they're consistently succeeding isn't because they've got this great, amazing project where they're building everything behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. They're not going to be creating like a new state-of-the-art stadium. There's plans to upgrade a stadium, but they're not going to be creating something like the Tottenham Stadium. They're not going to be going and building one of the biggest training grounds in world football. None of this is happening at Villa, whereas this is what's happening at Newcastle. The reason Villa are competing, as I said, it isn't because of the project. It's because they have what you could quite comfortably argue is in the conversation for the best manager in the league.
What do you mean?
They are competing because of Unai Emery. They are living by the skin of their teeth, pushing to the edge of SCR limits, living right on the edge, and Unai Emery is just consistently delivering success with that. The problem with that is obviously that's not sustainable. One, obviously they're living right on the edge, but you don't know how long Unai Emery is going to stay there, but I'll get to that a bit later in the video. Simply, the other side of it is, even if Emery does stay there forever, which obviously isn't, but if he does stay there forever and ever, there is always the possibility that one year it goes wrong. And when they're living so close to the edge, if it just have one bad year, that can set them back years, as you'd think it has with us, but I'm going to get into why it hasn't really with us properly later in the video. So everything that Villa are doing at the moment looks great. You know, they're getting Champions League football. They've just won a trophy, but ultimately that's not how you overcome PSR or SCR. The way to overcome SCR is what we're now doing, building a state-of-the-art training ground, building, you know, all these plans for a new state-of-the-art stadium, all this kind of stuff, all your massive sponsorships that we're now starting to get, all of this stuff, that's how you get That's how you break past SCR. As the big six clubs keep on saying every time the PSR argument comes up, revenue, 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 revenue. And to be honest, like, it's right. Like, and I hate to say it because it is still unfair, because obviously they were able to build their revenue without these restrictions in place. But regardless, there is a way around, there is a way to beat PSR, and that is the way it is: revenue, 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 revenue. And I do agree that there does need to be some governance in place, because otherwise, if our owners have completely free reign to spend as much money as they want, the same with like Man City and whoever else, it will just be insane. It will completely destroy the competitiveness of football, because everyone else in the league just won't even be able to come close to be able to compete with what our owners can spend. So there does need to be some governance in place. I do think it's a bit too far and a bit too anti-competitive at the moment, but there is a way out of this, and this is what we're working on. And I don't think Villa are going to be capable of it, because they just don't have the owners that we have. So as I said, the way around this is all, you know, training grounds, stadiums, things like the stack, all these, you know, sponsorships, all these ways to bring in revenue to then also essentially become one of the PSR protected clubs. Obviously, the issue with this being, can we grow fast enough? Because by the time we've grown our revenue, all these clubs in the PSR protected clubs, all your big six, whatever, they're also going to be growing their revenue. I do think we have a lot more sort of opportunity for growth, a lot of untapped revenue to be able to tap into, you know, untapped audiences. You know, we don't have the big worldwide fan base yet, so we can build into that still. So we likely are going to be able to grow faster than any of these other clubs. But you have to expect that by the time we get our 7, 8, 900 million a year revenue, by then the big six are probably going to be into the billions. But if we go back to Villa again, if you're, because obviously sponsorships are a big part of this, if you're wanting to sponsor a club and you're choosing between Villa or Newcastle right now, who are you going to choose? I feel like a lot of people watching this video are going to say Villa, because they're in the Champions League, you know, they seem to be consistently succeeding at the moment. And if you choose Villa, you're wrong, because what you're doing when you're signing a sponsorship deal is obviously you're signing a sponsorship deal for exposure. So as most people would be, you're thinking, right, well, my brand is going to be all over the Champions League, it's going to have loads of eyes on it. Sure, great. However, you're signing a 3, 4, 5 year long deal, and you could sign that 3, 4, 5 year long deal. Let's say this summer you've signed this 3, 4, 5 year long deal this summer, and what could happen is, by Christmas this year, let's say Enzo Maresca doesn't start really well at Man City. He gets sacked at Man City before Christmas. They throw a load of money at Unai Emery, take him away from Villa. Suddenly, Villa's project has essentially completely died. And that's what businesses are looking at. Businesses aren't looking at, oh, right now Villa are in the Champions League, so it'd be really good for me this year. They aren't looking at that. Businesses are looking at trajectory. They're looking at project. They're looking at all that kind of stuff. Especially when you're looking at investing in a sponsorship with a sports company, you're looking at the stability of that investment. You're looking at how likely is that investment to be as good as it is now in 3, 4, 5 years time. And everything at Villa is quite largely dependent on one man.
What do you mean?
Meanwhile, at Newcastle, we're signing sponsorship deal after sponsorship deal, building one of the world's best training grounds, one of the world's biggest training grounds. You know, we've got plans, apparently talks today, that the stadium, there's movement on it, and it might be in place by like 2030 as well. And again, that's going to be a state-of-the-art stadium that, you know, potentially capable of doing something like Tottenham's, where we're hosting Beyonce and whatever else, which increases our revenue to help us be one of the protected PSR clubs. So we then have that consistent, sustainable success that is almost protected, as we found out with Spurs, where even if you have a bad season, you're still realistically going to end up back in the top. Like, you are a much more stable club in the top 6 if you've created all this infrastructure behind the club first. And then for potential sponsors, that means you become a much more stable investment, because if, let's say, you have a season like Spurs, which always can happen in football, even 2 seasons like Spurs, they're still in a position where they can go and spend a fuckload of money as they have, and they're likely going to end up back in the top 6. So someone like Spurs having that bad season, that's kind of like the anomaly result, and businesses, sponsorships, they don't buy into that. They're going to be buying into the infrastructure behind the club, because the infrastructure is what's going to keep Spurs being able to spend as they are now, and being able to spend and be back in the top 6 pretty quickly. So sponsorships aren't going to be worried about, oh, well, they've had one season out of the top 6. Like, it's going to play a part, but it's not the main thing that they're focused on, because they're going to accept that's an element of the risk that you have in sport, but the infrastructure is there for them to get back. So it's not the anomaly that they're looking at the overall structure. At the moment, to a certain extent, whilst Emery is there, Aston Villa competing as highly as they are is almost considered as the anomaly, an anomaly that's created by Unai Emery.
Well, I mean,
as much as their success has been really consistent, as I said earlier, it is kind of all down to one man. And if he's to go, that overachieving anomaly, as you could call it, that goes away. So essentially what it sort of boils down to is, like, it seems like Villa are sort of taking the approach of, like, how it probably should be, because it is sport at the end of the day, trying to beat them on sporting merit and just trying to be better and have a better manager and better players and whatever. We're taking the approach of, which is what football realistically is nowadays. As much as you want it to be about sport, it's not, it's a business. We're taking the approach of build the business behind the club first. So if you can't beat them, join them. So for me, everything that came out today is like some of the best news that we've had at Newcastle in a long time. I know obviously we could do with a few first team signings going into the season, and I'm sure that will hopefully come. But everything that came out today is like actions speaking louder than words. All of this project 2030, all of this Newcastle 2.0, new era, all that kind of stuff. It's been great hearing that, but we've seen nothing on it. Today, we've seen massive movements on that, because phase 1, so for the first 5 years, that was very much just avoid relegation, stabilize the club, bring in a few players that are just before their peak, use them players to then generate a buzz, build the club's global standing, challenge for trophies, subsequently win a trophy that also helps generate the club's like global standing, build the buzz and whatever else, and then eventually sell all them players because they've developed into their peak, sell them all for a profit and rinse and repeat. Except for this time, going into what we now class as phase 2, Newcastle 2.0, whatever you want to call it, going into that, we are now going from a much more stable position. In the meantime, we've built elements of the infrastructure. We've built, we've got the right people in place, your CEO, your sporting director. Obviously, we've had a few hiccups on the way with sporting directors and whatever else. So we've built all that. Now we go into the next phase with a load of that built behind the scenes, and we go bigger and better, starting from a position with more stability. And in the midst of everything that came out today, as I said in the intro, there's one deal that sort of stood out to me that was quite interesting when I considered all of my Whoop theory stuff from a while back. And obviously with the Whoop theory, I seem to, as I said, come out to the wrong conclusion, but a lot of the working out was right. If it was a maths GCSE, I'd have got max points for working out, and I just got to the wrong answer. Although, as I said, I'm still almost certain something is coming eventually down the line with Whoop, but maybe not, I don't know. But there was one company, when I was doing all that research, that I even mentioned in the video, a company called IMG. Now, IMG, I mentioned in my previous video, are essentially a company that sort of like broker deals between sports clubs, sporting institutions, and brands. So they help connect the two and create these kind of partnerships. And one company that they have like a massive connection with at IMG is Coca-Cola. And we've just, I'm not sure if it's been announced yet, but it was definitely in the article that came out today. We are about to announce, or have announced, a deal with Coca-Cola to be sponsoring the Stack. So I think it's worth keeping an eye out on potentially other companies that IMG are affiliated with and have good connections with, as to any potential deals that we might have in the future, like potentially when like the Knox hydration thing runs out, or any other deals, any potential shirt sponsorships down the line. IMG could be a company that we use their connections to build these, massive deals going forward when we go on to potentially like phase 3, if there's a phase 3, or, as I say, once any of our current deals run out, we could be tapping into them IMG associated companies. Overall, I think it's just been really exciting news today, because I think it's created a monumental shift in the perception of the club at the perfect time, just as we go into the new season. I don't know if any of you remember on my video, I think it was like 2 videos ago, where I was talking about having to create this wave to be able to ride this wave where all the fans are optimistic, everyone is pulling in the right direction, everyone's excited, everyone is just united, I guess. I think that's a big part of what contributed to Eddie Howe's success. I'm not saying that he didn't do a great job, but I think a big part of it is you have to have that wave to be able to ride. You have to have that optimism and everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. And that was something that I was really worried about with Eisler, something that I really was worried that he just wasn't going to be able to create because the fan base has been so divided. Everyone's sort of thinking, oh, the PIF might sell eventually, or they might sell soon even. And I think obviously this news coming out today is the perfect timing because they're not going to sell. We now have commitment that they're not going to sell, and there is now action towards this Project 2030. Things are actually starting to fall into place. And I think if we get a couple new first team signings in over the next couple of weeks, as I said before, I think they might not be in for the Liverpool game, potentially not even in for the Spurs game. We probably have to allow Eisler and just the club in general the potential loss of them games because of the situation we found ourselves in with Eddie Howe leaving however many weeks before the season started. But if we get them signings in and we go into the Bournemouth game with them signings in by the end of the window, I think we really are then in a position where the wave has been potentially created, because we have that situation where we have all of this action on the Project 2030. We have all these new players coming in just as the excitement for the season starts. So it just creates that optimism, that buzz, that energy going into the season. And then if we can then ride that with a few good results, I think from there, the possibilities are endless. And also, we have also heard in the article today that the targets for the season are actually 8th. So I think a lot of us were going into it. Obviously, we've heard a lot in the media recently of, Newcastle are going to get relegated, or most of us, I think, were going into the season thinking, like a 14th place finish would probably be okay. 12th, is probably what you'd expect. And any higher on that is a bonus. For me, I'd said my sort of like minimum, my bare minimum was 12th. When we're hearing now that the club are actually expecting an 8th place finish, if they actually manage to achieve that 8th place finish, you kind of have to look at it in terms of like Newcastle 1.0, if you want to call it that, and then this Newcastle 2.0 that's been branded about. The way that you almost want to look at it is like, almost like a stock market. So you start with this trajectory where you start here, and then we've gone up and we've gone up and gone up and gone up, and that's the end of phase 1. Then you have what's called a correction, which happens in the stock market. So once there's always been like a big upward trend, there is then a correction where things kind of come back down a bit, and then you start 2.0, which is obviously your next upward trend. But the 2.0 starts from a higher position than 1.0. So if 3-4 years into phase 1.0, we manage to win a Carabao Cup, where can we be by the end of phase 2.0, which then brings on the possibility of what all these talks are of Project 2030. Now, obviously, at the moment, looking at it, there is a level of potentially pessimism about whether or not we can actually achieve 8th with the current squad that we have. We definitely do need some signings. Obviously, I suggested in my last video that Bergvall might be potentially an option. I'm now starting to think that, are Spurs really going to sell us Bergvall when we play them in about a week's time? Maybe they're sort of holding off on that until we've played them. There is also the potential of Nico Gonzalez. Maybe all this Nico Gonzalez stuff is to flush Bergvall out, because maybe Spurs are thinking, we don't want to sell you him before we play against you. Maybe we're being like, right, well, we'll go for Nico Gonzalez instead then. And then Spurs are thinking, oh, well, fuck, we've spent a load of money and we kind of have to sell him because of the amount of money that they've been spending. Maybe that's to flush them out. I don't know. That's just me sort of guessing, hypothesizing, whatever. But either way, ultimately, today has been massive, massive, massive news that gives us massive optimism, a potential wave to ride going into this season, and a potential wave to ride for the next 5 years again. And that is just fucking mint. So obviously, let me know in the comments, do you think that 8th place finish is possible? Do you think we'll make any signings that make an 8th place finish possible? And does your perspective over the next 5 years change with what's come out today? Do you potentially have any belief now in a Project 2030? I want to know what you guys are all thinking in the comments. But for now, that's all the noise for this one. Until the next one.